Hello, hello, I'm Ghost. I am your host for the next little while, and I am the host with the most. Anyway, today we'll be discussing something that's been on my mind quite a lot recently, which is it moral to adapt true crime into a film format? Now, I'm not talking a documentary. I think that's an entirely different conversation, actually. But when it comes to, say, making a horror movie out of something that actually happened, that little based off a true story tag at the beginning of movies can mean a lot of things. Sometimes it means that it was loosely based off of something that actually happened. Look at something like, Halloween. Now, Halloween doesn't have that, but it was loosely based off of the serial killer Ed Gein, as was Texas Chainsaw. Is that immoral? But that's not really the focus of today's video. Today's focus is when we literally take an actual case and just make a movie about it. A dramatization of something that doesn't need to be dramatized. One good example of this is Concrete Encased High School Girl Murder Case, Broken 17-Year-Olds, which has a lovely ring to it. Directed by the very same person that directed most of the All Night Long series, Concrete Encased High School Girl, or, let's see, what's a nice, more, less mouthfully way of putting it? CEHG. I'm calling it CEHG from now on. CEHG is a really, really odd movie. Junko Furuta is a Japanese murder case which has grown extremely famous in recent years because of how unbelievably brutal it is. Personally, I try and shy away from telling anything about true crime because personally I think it's really, really hard to walk that line without just being exploitative. But I will say, and of course this does not cover the extent of it whatsoever, but essentially she was held captive for 41 days, if I am correct, by a group of high school boys with Yakuza affiliation. And she was tortured, beaten, raped, and ultimately she died. CEHG is kind of an interesting movie, because it attempts to explain itself as simply trying to create discussion, and attempting to provide the details that the media avoided covering. Note that this was made not long after the case, less than 10 years after the case actually happened. Many people are quick to point at this film and consider it exploitative. I don't believe it's that simple. So let's talk about it. It attempts to tell the story of Junko Furuta and her horrible, horrible time. Now, something to keep in mind that this was a real girl, not just some piece of fiction or something to talk about on YouTube. This is a real girl that really had this happen to her. And not even 10 years after her death, she was turned into a film. And might I add, the film is rather well directed, and it's well acted. It's not a bad movie, exactly. The question is it morally wrong? You see, by using her story to gain money, it inherently is, to a certain degree, exploitative, even if there really is good intentions behind it, which is debatable. I believe that it really and truly is just at least a little bit exploitative if you're taking a true story and making a movie about it. The big issue is that we don't really know if she would have been okay with this. Me personally, if I get killed, dude, I would be psyched to have a movie made out of me. But at the same time, I don't know if that's universally applicable. Furthermore, if they're making a movie about me, I don't want my killers to be glorified whatsoever. Not that this movie seems to do so, but I want, the most fat, vile, uncharacteristically disgusting people playing my killers. Just so that they really, really, can't sleep at night. Not only do they have to live with knowing that they killed me, beautiful myself, but also they have to live knowing that the way they're portrayed in their film adaptation, their big break, is very disgusting and unlikable. I mean, I want, a sweaty, deathly ill human just playing all of my killers. And Jack Black. I want Jack Black to play one of them, just because I think it will be funny.
immortal in people and shit. No. In real life.
I certainly believe that this movie is forced to be at least a little bit exploitative. But is there even good intentions behind it? Or is that just a way of masking what it's really doing, which is just making money? Let's talk about that. The film approaches the topic fairly seriously. It doesn't try and make jokes or lighten the mood at any point. It keeps a consistently dark, grim tone. And it shows a large amount of horrible, horrible things. Though, I believe that it, in a respectful manner, avoids showing certain graphic details. While you could argue that it's dancing around the full brutality of the situation, I believe it's just more so respectful to not only the actor, but the victim, to keep intact a level of their dignity. But overall, it's a very unrelenting film. It shows a consistent stream of brutality, and in reality, it doesn't look away all that much. You'll see beating, and you'll see raping, and you'll see a lot of bad, bad things, and you'll hear every cry and scream she lets out. It's very, very hard to watch, especially knowing that this really happened, and that this isn't even covering nearly half of the intensity and brutality of what occurred. Now, if the movie simply told the story in a linear way, and focused on the failure of the judicial system, rather than simply throwing it in at the end, I believe that this could have been a genuinely interesting and quality piece. But unfortunately, I don't believe it quite does so. At first, I was mixed. Then I leaned into it genuinely being made with good intentions. But around halfway into the movie, I began feeling mixed again. Because suddenly, it started having a MatPat moment, where it was dropping a bunch of theories about the murder, for like 12 minutes, and it felt very, very not only out of place, but it just felt like it was kind of ruining what they were doing. Because they say that what they're doing is trying to create discussion about, the violent youth and the judicial system in Japan at the time, and yet they're taking a 12-minute detour to just, kind of fatten up their runtime with a bunch of, well, this is what we here believe happened. Which just generally feels disrespectful, again, especially considering how short of a time period there was between the creation and release of this film and the actual case happening. Now, the ending admittedly pulled me back a little bit more toward the side of good, as it does begin criticizing the failure of the judicial system in the way that it sentenced the boys so lightly as a result of their youth, believing that, young people should be able to be given a chance to reform themselves no matter how heinous the crime, as was things at the time. Furthermore, it also points out several other violent cases, albeit very, very briefly. It does tell us brief details about many other cases in which high schoolers, particularly high school boys, unleashed their teenage angst in violent, criminal ways. For this, I found it interesting. Yet the question remains, is this moral? Is it morally okay to create something like this? Even if there was good intentions behind it, I don't believe that you can fully say that these people are innocent with the creation of their film. Not only are they profiting off of a tragic event, but furthermore, it seems as though they're genuinely treating things simply as a movie, not just as a way of telling their story, and allowing people to be informed, and fighting against the media censorship of the case. So while I think that there are certain things it did that genuinely are somewhat positive, at the same time, I feel as though the existence of this film, and many others like it, are somewhat belittling to the victims. Especially knowing that the killers are alive, the killers' families are alive, and the family of the victim is alive. On the other hand, there's Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, a movie which I've talked about previously, though it's not a particularly impressive video, so I won't actually plug it. I'll make you actually go out of your way to find it. But in a nutshell, I discuss the film, its events, and I state that it is one of the greatest horror movies of all time, and one of my personal favorite. What's the difference? Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer is based off of two real serial killers. The story of Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole is one of fame. and one of great brutality, as they had many, many victims. It's actually ridiculous, especially if you actually take into account how many they claimed they had that they couldn't really prove. If any of that is actually true, they are truly some of the most prolific killers in America that we know of. That being said, I'm a big defender of the movie. What's the difference? It's based off of a true story. Well, this film, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, takes these two serial killers and creates a movie solely to explore the mind of these monsters. It takes up the perspective of Henry and views the world around them. And not only does it do a great job of creating empathy toward the victims and the people surrounding them, but it also does a great job of just exploring the psyche of these killers, how they differ, and how their pasts have brought them to the point of violence. I believe that that film, while not without its exploitative side, is genuinely passable from a moral standpoint because of that. It has no interest in simply dramatizing a fully true tale. It takes these characters and it takes certain truths, and then it creates a fictional surrounding, and explores these people in a very interesting way. It's curious to explore the minds of monsters, and by using real people that did these terrible things as a basis, I believe that we get a more accurate exploration of these monstrous minds than, say, something like, I don't know, fucking Joker in The Dark Knight or something, where we attempt to kind of like get into the Joker's psyche a little bit, and ultimately, since he's a fully fictional character, we don't, I believe, get the full picture. One more film that I'll briefly discuss, which I've also already discussed on this channel, is The Untold Story, which is actually a comedic retelling, loose retelling, of a real murder case that happened, in which an entire family was murdered. This one's a little odd, because it's treating this story as comedic. Now, personally, this is another movie that I personally quite heavily defend. I think that this, and its sequel, albeit the sequel doesn't have any basis in reality, are genuinely quality, interesting movies, and interesting takes on horror. In particular, the first one. The first one attempts to tackle this topic comedically, which on paper sounds like a recipe made for disaster. To treat something that really happened with a comedic twist, that really doesn't seem like a particularly good decision. But in the end, the comedy of the film is used at the killer's expense. It'd be one thing if the humor came from the killer just simply being a wacky individual and killing all these people and haha, look at that person die. But no, the vast majority of the humor is either at the expense of the shockingly dysfunctional police force or the psychopathic murderer. And it uses its humor to mock and satirize the situation. That's one thing that's always something to keep in mind. Satire, generally speaking, is a respectable way of dealing with truths. But there are many, many movies like this. There's a wide range of films based off of true stories, some which are essentially just, minute-by-minute recreations, and others rather loose. So is it moral, overall, in a generally speaking manner? And I'd argue that it's mostly in the intention. If your intention is to not make money, but to spread awareness and create discussion genuinely, then that's a semi-respectable point of view, I believe. And if you're releasing your movie for free, in particular, then I believe that it's actually semi-righteous, in a sense, to do so. However, if you intend on selling DVDs about your movie where you're talking about how, this one person was, kidnapped and beaten terribly until they died, I just simply don't believe that that's respectable. Especially if you're attempting to dramatize the events that don't need further dramatization, because let's be honest here, being kidnapped and killed, generally speaking, that's a pretty dramatic thing already. You don't need to spice it up with your own little things. It just doesn't make sense. Be respectful of the victims. Be respectful of the victims' families. And if you can, ask permission from the families if they're still around. And if they're not, If it's been many, many years since this case or something, understand that time does matter. If it's 5 years after and the entire family is killed or something, you probably shouldn't go for it. However, once it's been several decades, it's a bit more comfortable to discuss things like this. I'm not saying that there's a clear-cut answer, because in the end, it's not a consistent thing to talk about. There's a lot of differentiation from movie to movie. Horror is an interesting field, and there's no denying that a large portion of horror is based in true events. So, I suppose the best thing I can say is support what you believe you can support and want to support. You don't need to support movies if you believe that it's morally wrong but it's considered an essential or something. Understand that sometimes people are just bad people doing bad things. And you're not necessarily a bad person for watching those movies, but whether you do or don't want to support these people, just give it some thought. But like I said, there's no clear-cut answer to this question. I just thought it's interesting to create some discussion and get some ideas out there. Thank you. I'm Ghost. I've been your host. Let me know what you think. Also join the new Discord server, which there will be a link to in the description. Thank you. I'm wishing you all the best.